One of the things we can do to quite easily access particular aspects of ourselves that are related to shadow is to do a practice where you sort of inhabit, so you just imagine yourself inhabiting the body of the person whom you feel shadow or whom you feel reactive towards. So for instance, you were speaking about Sarah Palin, so an easy exercise could be to embody Sarah Palin and to sort of experience what you experience in that position, so representing her, and then try to see if you can feel any value in what you're experiencing. And what you described is that you did that. You sort of were able to glean from doing a similar practice, to glean what you could learn from basically Sarah Palin's orientation, which was more fearlessness and more owning of the natural instincts towards wanting to have influence in the world. So is there someone else you could take at this moment that you haven't yet done this practice with?
Freddie Mercury.
Okay, as a golden shadow, that's nice.
Yeah.
For everyone who's watching this, the invitation is to choose someone towards whom you feel exaggerated emotionality. And then indeed it can be either positive or negative. So it can either be an idolization of someone where you feel that they're superior to you and you're inferior because they're so great and you're so puny in a certain sense, or it can be someone towards whom you feel very strong negative feelings, and indeed it can be aversion or disgust or things like that. And the next step, if you've chosen your person, is to close your eyes if you're in a position where you can do this and you feel comfortable doing so, and then to imagine yourself inhabiting the body of the person towards whom you feel this strong emotionality. And as you inhabit in your imagination this person's body, continue to breathe in a comfortable, calm way. And notice anything you might feel arising within your body and within your awareness. What differences do you notice when you imagine yourself to be this other person? What is present that is typically not present in your own experience? And see whether you can acknowledge the value that this person's orientation towards life has. Is there something about this person's orientation towards reality that you can appreciate and see the value of? And next, if you've identified something that you're able to appreciate in this person's perspective on reality, ask yourself the question, how could the quality of your own life be improved if you were to occasionally demonstrate or exhibit that aspect of this person that you've come to appreciate more often? In other words, how could you benefit from being like this person more often in your life? And as you continue to breathe deeply, calmly, and smoothly, bring your attention back to where you are now. Conclude the imagining of inhabiting this other person's body, and now inhabit your own body again. Become aware of any sounds you might be able to hear around you. Feel the weight of your body resting on the surface on which you're sitting. Perhaps you can feel your feet touching the floor. When you're ready, open your eyes again. So, if I may ask, Nomali, who did you choose and what did you experience?
That was really fun and a great exercise, Lee. That was really nice. Well, nice because I picked Freddie Mercury. I'm sure if I picked Trump, it may have been more difficult, harder. But it still left me feeling a little sad, or kind of connecting with the yearning to be like Freddie in some ways. Although I don't think there is anybody in the planet who will ever be like Freddie. Uh, the truth, but still, I think when you said inhabit his body, I noticed that I was sort of like this when, at the beginning, and the minute you said kind of become like Freddie's body, I just naturally just became a lot more straighter, and that's actually something that I love about him, is that he always had this very elegant posture to him. And his movement was just, very elegant. And his dancing was always crazy and wild. And that is also really beautiful because he was so uninhibited. Uninhibited. He would pour all of himself to his performances. And so, constantly driven by his creativity is something that I often wish for myself, is that I paid more attention to my own creativity. He started off as a fashion designer. I did too. I had a career in fashion design. I have a degree in fashion design. I that was my first career. He used to sketch a lot and illustrate, and in fact, he's the one who sketched and designed the Queen logo and all that. So anyway, I think like primarily it's the creative aspect that I probably am so enamored by in him, And
okay, so the next question from me to you then would be, if you were to create a sort of a short practice for the next week where you would embody that creativity that you idolize, I think is fair to say, in Freddie Mercury, what practice would that be? Would that be to create a drawing this week, or would it be to perhaps redesign your apartment? I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, I'll have to think about it a little bit. What could I do, something that made me feel was a creative endeavor? Yeah, I mean, during these COVID days, certainly I do a lot of kind of arranging and rearranging and making things beautiful. And so I could do that. I could literally pull out some of my sketch pads and see if I want to do some illustrations or sketching, which is stuff that I like. I also like creating online, just graphically creating things online as well. So, but yeah,
well, I can say from my experience that you're very good at it as well. So,
thank you. Yeah.
Excellent. So personally, I inhabited the person you and I know, whom we were discussing earlier, and I experienced beyond my reactivity. So that sort of dropped off, because once you inhabit the person, there's no reactivity, because the reactivity comes from looking outward towards the person. So once you're in the person, there's no, or at least typically there's no reactivity. So and I could experience a sort of a very laid back sort of relaxedness, which makes sense that that would be something that I would be that I would have a reactivity towards, because as we discussed during the types call, I have a lot of affinity with type 1, and type 1 people are typically very disciplined and precise, and I have a very well developed discipline in my life indeed. So the playfulness and sort of relaxedness, that is something that is further away from me than it is for this other person. So to embody that immediately sort of connected me with a value that of the value of, or one of the values of their way of inhabiting reality. So
Yeah.
and for me, so if I were to develop a practice, then for this week, for instance, I would perhaps do a relaxation exercise, just lying down, for instance, on a mat, and do some breathing exercises, and which I know I always enjoy very much.
So. Yeah, excellent. Really good. What are some, do you do any kind of more sort of social examples that come to your mind, or cultural examples that you've seen in, I know you live in Amsterdam, I live in the US. You know, something like an example that I always have been so, such a classic example of shadow is the number of, um, like, how should I say it? Uh, Gay conversion therapy is something that
Oh,
still happens in many parts of the world, which is just stunning. Is that with therapy you can become ungay or not gay, and it's stunning how many of these people who are anti-gay and trying to make gay people straight have eventually come out as, oh, oops, actually, I'm gay. And
there's
so
a
that, you know, in a conservative culture, sometimes there can be a lot of homophobia, unfortunately. And for people growing up in those communities, they'll do whatever they can to deny, if they are gay, to deny that in themselves. And so, to the extent of even becoming a gay conversion therapist, or a so called doctor who can kind of make people right. Um, and then they find out, actually, you know what? This is something that has been in me, and I was too afraid or too fearful to embrace it.
it takes a lot of strength also to embrace the shadow and to see, aha, that that which I saw outside of myself is within myself. And that's again why I think that Jung said the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely.
So perhaps we can talk a little bit about what different teachings you might want to check out as examples of or ways of getting in touch with our shadow. A very simple exercise that Ken Wilber and others have talked about in the integral community is something that we refer to as the 3-2-1 process. And so we've talked about how we project our shadow outward. So it's an it out there to begin with. It's something out there, like he's doing that. He's horrible. He's awful. So the first thing is to look at that. In other words, to face that, the third person perspective. And then, so that's the 3 of the 3-2-1 process. And then the second part of it is the second, the 2 of the process is that it comes in some ways to the lower left quadrant, in some ways, the we space, where I can actually talk to it. I can connect with that. So it's not that so much, but I'm having a relationship with whoever is or whatever is troubling me. And then the first person of it is to actually make it first person, me, my own. I become that. So to face that, to speak with it, and then to become it. And there are many other modules or teachings that deal with the shadow. One of my favorite tools is the immunity to change process, which has been taught by Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy after years of research, where and I also became trained under them. I do that process with my clients all the time. This is a process where we are looking at the hidden assumptions, and oftentimes these hidden assumptions are the shadow that somehow keeps us a prisoner and stops us or sabotages our goals, how we want to accomplish our goals. So the immunity to change process is really wonderful in how they look at shadow. I think even though they don't necessarily approach it as shadow work, I especially like how Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy talk about how when we find our assumption that is holding us back from really manifesting, and really kind of checking it against, is this a fact or is this just some story, some assumption that is preventing me from really manifesting in the world in the way that I want to. It's once we find it, it's like we have this psychological immune system that's trying to protect us from experiencing whatever is difficult. Change is inherently difficult for the most part, and we don't want to face that difficulty. So this psychological immune system is trying to protect us. But that with the work of immunity to change, which is shadow work primarily, it's taking us from being unconsciously immune to becoming consciously immune to that shadow, and then to being able to consciously release that shadow. And when you can really feel that that shadow is no longer an issue for us, is when we are unconsciously released. So the shadow is actually, I've done enough work with it that now it doesn't bother me. Now my blood doesn't boil each time Trump or Sarah Palin are speaking, or Mitch McConnell or Lindsey Graham. But yeah, so that's one way. What other work comes to your mind as great shadow work?
Yeah, so one of the approaches that I have used in the past with clients and groups of people during workshops is called the core qualities method by Daniel Offman, who is a Dutch consultant. And he basically works with 4 squares. And in the first square, you have your allergy. So in this example, say that your allergy is towards passivity. So people who display passive behavior. So the reason that you don't display passive behavior is then in the next square. And that is, of course, that you're an active person. So you display activity. And then we ask the question, what is the exaggerated version of activity? So then that would be overactivity and a restlessness. So let's say then if we look at restlessness, we could then fill in the next square, which is what is the quality that we can exhibit in life that is a healthy antidote to restlessness. And of course, that would be relaxation or relaxedness. So then we have the 4th square, and then the allergy is the exaggerated version of what we have in the 4th square, and that is a passivity. So passivity is an exaggeration of relaxedness. And then with relaxedness, we sort of identify the challenge that you have. So the passivity is your allergy, and the activity is what we could call your core quality. So you're an active person. And the pitfall, of course, of being active is being overactive or being restless. And then the challenge, therefore, for you to sort of integrate the shadow of passivity is to experience relaxedness more often. So to be someone who, instead of being active all of the time, which results in the pitfall of restlessness, occasionally takes rest or regularly takes rest, and therefore embodies the positive quality of that exaggerated trait that you are disturbed by in other people. So this sounds fairly complicated, and it can be, but it's very insightful if it applies to you, and if you identify all of the aspects that fill in this model. So another approach to working with shadow material relates to what you were just saying, Namali, is with the immunity to change process. Once you've identified assumptions or thoughts or feelings that are holding you back, you can also use an approach that Byron Katie developed and that many people are probably familiar with. And she asks us to ask 4 questions in relation to the assumption we're dealing with. So the first question is it true? The second question is, can you absolutely know that it's true? The third question is, how do you react, or what happens when you believe the assumption, the thought, the feeling? And the fourth question is, who would you be without that thought, feeling, assumption, opinion, things like that? And next, then, there's a sort of a turnaround. So for instance, if the assumption or idea or feeling you were working with and that you identified was, I'm not worthy of being loved and receiving love and attention, for instance, then the turnaround is, I am worthy of being loved and receiving love and attention. So, and then working with that as if it were true and embodying that, and then sort of reversing the shadow assumption. That's another technique that you can use.
Yeah. I could say, I think this was actually, I had never thought about it in that way, but you mentioned this another day, that Tonglen, which is a practice that comes from sort of Mahayana or Vajrayana Buddhist tradition mostly, where you literally, it's a meditation where you actually breathe in the suffering of others. You actually call out the suffering of others into you, and it's almost visualized as breathing in dark smoke and then breathing out to that person who is suffering white light, luminous, clear luminosity back to them. So you could say that in some ways you could use that Tonglen meditation as a shadow practice, because when you are actually triggered by someone, and what if you actually realize that that person is probably struggling too, or has certain issues that they haven't dealt with, even aren't even aware of perhaps. What if I actually share in that struggle, whether they know it or not? I can still actually embrace that, and that's even sort of embracing my own shadow, which I project onto that person, but then also inviting that person's shadow into me. So I think that that could be a powerful practice. Even though I haven't actually done it, it makes sense to me as clearly something I'd like to try. I do Tonglen meditation often,
Okay.
but to do it as shadow practice would be really interesting, I think.
I agree. And I'll upload a video then of an audio exercise that I recorded, which is an inhabiting shadow exercise. So for people who are interested in going slightly deeper into a practice, then they can do that.
Yeah, so in polarity management, we often see things in black and white, or like good and bad. And polarity management is actually reminding us to look at, for example, stability, instead of looking at stability and instability, and we might have a reaction to that. Instead, what if we actually look at it as stability and change? that some people really seek stability in their work or in their lives, and other people might be more comfortable with change often. So what happens is that if somebody goes to the negative bar shadow aspects of stability, too much stability it could mean stagnation, loss of energy, and missed opportunities. For people who like a lot of change, that the shadow of that, if you kind of push it to the extreme, is perhaps lack of continuity, lack of consistency, and you lose your core values, and you can take really foolish risks. So if people who are pushing change can make things really unstable in some ways. So polarity management lets us see that, not to see these elements as shadow, instead that we can actually see, if we go in the other direction of something that is triggering us, it becomes shadow. But then if we make it healthier, that change could be that there's new energy in change, there is new direction and creativity, and we tap into new wisdom. But we also get to appreciate, if my shadow is stability, which I see as stuck, rigid, stagnating, loss of energy, loss of creativity, then my working with that shadow energy could let me see that actually it's not stagnation, it's stability that can actually provide continuity, sticking to core values, and then kind of really living in the present moment and being realistic about it also. So in that way, polarity management really invites us to look at our shadow and to phrase it or to reframe it more as what might be the healthy aspect of whatever we see as a shadow. That's
Nice.
the
And
David Johnston, I think, is his
okay.
name. Yeah.
Well, it's nice, and it sounds indeed a lot like the core qualities model, where the challenge is indeed to embrace the positive aspects of that which we actually fear or are disturbed by.
Yeah.
And I think that's perhaps the fundamental for all of these, or the foundation of all of these practices that we're speaking about. So
Yeah. Another teaching that you might want to check out is also really for great shadow work, is also Eugene Gentlin's Focusing. There's a very small book called Focusing, and I think Eugene Gendlin has also done some really great work around what we refer to as the felt sense. So we notice our trigger, and then Eugene Gentlin's Focusing work is where you keep going deeper into the felt sense underneath that which triggers us. So I love his work as well. So maybe perhaps this is a good place to end. Thank you, Lee, for sharing your wisdom around the shadow work that we've talked about today. So
you too.
yeah, and I think shadow is really great to work if we are ready for that work. For some people, it could be working with a coach. For some people, it could be doing a lot of self work and talking with friends, sharing what's going on for you, sharing with someone that you trust. And for some people, it does perhaps require therapy, more work around if there is addiction, trauma. It's really imperative even that you find a really good therapist to work with. So ultimately, once again, just to recap a little bit, shadow is important in developing an integral life practice. And I would say shadow work never ends. I think it's comedy to think that shadow work ever ends. We are human, and we will always be given a multitude of variety of opportunities to be triggered and to point our fingers at the outside world. And whenever we do that, it's an incredible opportunity to see where we need to grow, what we need to really release so that we can start living and really stepping into the full potential of who we are. So shadow work is important because of that. Just to really continue to pay attention to what of me am I hurling in front of me, and how do I get to re-own that, reclaim that, befriend that, love it, and even cradle it with a lot of care. And then once we have done that, we can then gently release that. And that's not to say that it won't come back, but for the most part, you've done the best that you can. And sometimes that's all we can ask for of our lives.
Well, thanks, Namali, and thanks everyone for watching. So we'll see you on the next video.
Yes. Thank you very much, Lee. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.